you for taking the time out of your evening and coming here tonight to see us. My name is Amy Parsons. It's my privilege to open this special event for you this evening. To give you a little bit of the background on this event, Hadley has an active climate change committee, and they're helping to move the town forward in reducing its ecological and carbon footprint. In April, we had the first ever Hadley Climate Change Day. Some of you may have attended that. Over the summer, the committee has continued its work, which included drafting and revising a climate emergency declaration. The Select Board asked the committee to organize this event as a way to learn more about climate change and what Hadley can do, both in terms of emission reductions and with preparing for the impacts through adaptation and resilience building. We also wanted this event to provide a forum for the public to have an opportunity to learn about the draft climate emergency declaration and to provide input before it's finalized and presented to the Select Board for a vote later this fall. So thank you to the committee for organizing this event. Thank you to our expert speakers who agreed to come on short notice and be available to help us understand these matters. And thank you to everyone who came out tonight, which shows us the interest Hadley residents have in this critical topic. We very much look forward to hearing from you all. And so without further ado, I now hand over to Randy Iser, my fellow Select Board member and the former town moderator, to give us guide through this evening. So Randy, take it away.
Thank you, Amy. What I want to do right now is just go over the agenda so everybody understands what's going to happen this evening. So this is an informational forum. No decisions are being made tonight. That'll happen on town meeting floor on October 27th. We've got 3 speakers who will present their views on climate change. After the third speaker has finished, there will be a question and answer period relative to the information presented by the speakers. After that, members of the Climate Change Committee will read the draft declaration. After the reading of the declaration, there will be a question and comment period relative to the declaration. I request that you allow all speakers to present their information without interruption. There are index cards available for you to write down any questions you may have, which you can ask later. Whether you believe in climate change or not, the Climate Change Committee would like to hear your thoughts, concerns, and suggestions regarding the declaration. With that said, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Julie Brigham-Greddy. And Professor Greddy is Professor for Glaciology at UMass Amherst and the Director for the Geosciences Graduate Program there. She is also a past chair of the Polar Research Board of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. She has been conducting research in the Arctic for 40 years, including 8 field seasons in remote parts of northeast Russia since 1991. Julie studies glaciers and sea ice both in the present and in the past to understand the climate changes occurring in the present and to use that science to inform policy.
All right, and somebody can start up do you know where my... Thanks, Susie. Thanks very much for inviting me to share with you tonight. There we go.
And you can just move it forward with this.
I'll use the arrows. Thank you. Yeah? Got it? Okay, what I'd like to just give you a summary of is climate change is global, but it's also local. And that's really where I want to take today's story about it. And we need to be optimists, not pessimists. We can do quite a bit. If we look at how the Earth normally changes climate, if you hear about people talking about normal climate change, well, this is how it does it. But I want you to notice this is changes in the Earth's orbit around the sun on tens of thousands of year time scale. That's normal climate change. When we had a mile of ice over Hadley 20,000 years ago, that's because the world's temperature was 5 degrees cooler because of these cycles. That's not what's happening today. Because the other way we can make the world warmer is with greenhouse gases. And if we look at this record from left to right is the fossil air preserved in ice cores from Antarctica. We can go into that fossil air and measure the methane, measure the CO2. And what we notice is that it falls within a window of about 180, 280, 180, 280, normal types of CO2. That's the Earth doing its normal thing through all the different ecosystems, the oceans and the atmosphere, on a normal basis. And we can see that in orange there, in the orange letters, pre-industrial, before we had the Industrial Revolution, we were at about 278, or call it 280 parts per mil. So that's our normal window. But you know what? This is where we are over here now. We are outside that envelope of normal change. And so I want to put that into the history of my own family. If you look at when my grandmother was born, about over 120 some years ago, in 1898, CO2 was at 290 parts per mil. When my parents were born in the mid-20s, it was 305. I was born in 1955, and it was 313. I had my kids at around 350, and now we're at 417. So this number is going up. You know, if this was a cholesterol number, your doctor would be worried, okay? So this is going up rapidly, and that is the problem, and that's within the lifetime of my own family. So I want to just also make a point. It's often hard to understand from the media, what's the difference between weather and climate? So I love this little diagram that shows on the left axis surface temperature and on the bottom time. And if any of you've walked a dog on a leash, you know that the dog will wander all over the place. That's like the weather. The weather goes up and down, up and down. But the trend here of the owner of the dog is the climate. It's the long-term trend. Whereas weather is kind of what you see out the window, the climate trend is kind of the long-term average. So let's look at that. Hopefully you can see this. This is for Hampshire County. You can see from 1895 that the temperature has wandered around like that dog. But the trend is clear. That's the owner. That's the climate trend that we're on. And so you can see that Hampshire County has already increased about 2.5 degrees C since 1895, and it's rising just a little bit faster than the world average. But climate precipitation is doing the same thing. Again, the wiggles up and down. That's weather. That's what you see out the window. That's the dog going around. But the trend is the climate change. And you can see that we're getting wetter. And that is the overall trend, is they're getting wetter and warmer. Despite what you say, well, wait a minute, we just went through a drought. That's weather. Okay, we're going through a drought. And notice 1965 on this figure. It's, right here, there's a huge, huge deficit here. So that's the weather. That's not the climate trend. And if you look across the entire country at extreme weather events, when we have excessive rain, many, many inches in a storm, that has increased 71% in the Northeast. The whole country, even Alaska, is getting increased high rainfalls, but the Northeast is getting even more of them. And we can all relate to all the different events that have happened here recently, and even just recently, of all the just quite astonishing. I can still remember listening on the radio about the water about to go over the Bridge of Flowers in Shelburne. So in the future, as we go forward, here are the projections. If we don't do something about climate change, the upper orange diagrams show left is winter, right is summer, and that is showing at least in the next 50 to 60 years. Imagine when today's elementary kids are our age, okay? When today's elementary kids are our age, the temperatures may be as much as 6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than present. In a worst-case scenario, the bottom is true, and the numbers are even much higher in both winter and summer. So that is the projections that we're really on relative to where we are today. The projections also, winter and summer temperatures, just imagine here on this diagram on the bottom shows from 1950, so just a little bit before I was born, up to 2100, way out in the future, not that far, but 80 years out in the future. Today's coldest winters in the future will be like the warmest winters today, the coldest winters. Imagine today's kids talking about 2022 being the coldest year ever. That's possible. And that's the trajectory we're on. The bottom one is the summer. Again, the hottest summers will become the coolest ones. The hottest summers will become the coolest ones as we go forward in the next 60 to 80 years. This diagram is actually quite helpful if you think about summer in Massachusetts at the end of the century, say by 2080 and 2090, could feel like South Carolina. Have anyone been to South Carolina? Even Washington, D.C. Whew! High moisture, it really takes a lot out of you. There'll be an increase in the heat index. But you can see Massachusetts is moving toward, in the worst case scenario, a South Carolina type of environment as we go out to 2070. Okay, that's only 50 years from now. Extreme heat. Predictions, I don't have one for local, but for Boston, where today we have maybe a few days above 100 degrees. In the future, it could be as much as 3 weeks above 100 degrees in Boston. In Indiana, I've heard as much as 2 months of temperatures in Indiana over 100 degrees. What are they going to grow in that environment? But that's the projection in the next 50 years. So we need to do something. The International Committee on Climate Change is showing the forecasting. We need to drop our fossil fuel emissions. We've got to do all the different possible things. I'm happy to comment if someone has a question about climate atmosphere alteration. Boy, there's some scary stuff being proposed that's not good for us. But we really need to think about getting nationally, in our state and locally here in Hadley and Greenfield and Amherst and all these, we need to come together to decrease that, because we don't have much of a window left to keep the world below the 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement. We're very close to actually exceeding that now. So are these feasible? Yes, if you just check off the boxes, it's environmentally, technologically, economically feasible, and the rest of it is us. We have to make that decision that we can do this. And of course, it's important. It's got to matter to business and economy that we're doing the right thing. Of course, that's extremely true. And so I just hear this projection, I want to just put up, some of you have heard of Greta Thunberg. It doesn't have to be Greta Thunberg. It could be any high school kid you know today. By the time these projections come out, they're going to be in their 90s. So this is a short period of time. It's not future. It's not Star Wars time periods. We're looking at within someone's lifetime. So I really want to consider this. The science is clear. I just came back from 3 weeks in Arctic Alaska working with indigenous communities. They're concerned. Sea level is rising, their coastlines eroding, their subsistence living people, and everything that they hunt and fish is changing. So I can talk about that from a very personal level. We can be optimistic. If you haven't seen these S-curve idea, technology moves in S-curves. So if we think about, on the left-hand side on the bottom, electricity, 1900. It went from no one having electricity, to everyone having electricity within a matter of a few decades. Think about color TV, radio, computer, internet. You can apply anything that we've adapted to. How many of you had cell phones 20 years ago? Nobody. So we know we can adapt technologically very quickly. And so I want you to imagine where we are with solar panels and wind power and other kinds of green technology. We're just starting up that S-curve right now. And within another decade or two, we could have a very different scenario as these technologies advance. And I want you to notice, too, these S-curves are getting steeper. In other words, we're adapting faster, as we all know with the internet and our cell phones. So this is optimism. It's not as bad as you think. Things are happening quickly, and we just need to keep that perspective. So, and in my last slide, just to remember, we're part of Earth. In the middle of Earth, there's air. We're in the air. We are part of this ecosystem. We are animals in this ecosystem, and we need to be responsible citizens of that atmosphere. So thank you very much.
All right, next up is Andrew Smith. He's a longtime resident of the Connecticut River Valley, where he lives with his wife and 3 energetic children. Serving as the Greater Connecticut River Valley Regional Coordinator for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program is the natural continuation of a career that has allowed him to work on matters of climate adaptation and climate mitigation during his tenure as the City of Holyoke's first Director of Conservation and Sustainability. Throughout the arc of Andrew's career, the role of a municipality can play in making our Commonwealth more resilient in the face of climate change has served as the organizing principle of his work. Andrew.
It's so funny. You write those things and you think nobody's ever going to read that, and then someone reads it, and then you realize how absurd you sound. Okay, to yourself. So again, I'm Andrew Smith. I'm based here in the Greater Connecticut River Valley. I work for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, and I focus on the climate adaptation side of the climate change equation, and I work for the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So I'm going to do a little bit of history about what we're doing in the Commonwealth to address both mitigation and adaptation, climate change, the aspects of the climate change problem that we're confronting. So a little history about the program. So 2016, Governor Baker signed Executive Order 569, which created the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, established climate change coordinators across multiple agencies, developed the State Adaptation Plan, and then 2018, the Environmental Bond Bill was codified into law, which set aside a fund of $200 million for climate change adaptation projects. So these are kind of guiding documents for how we're working within the adaptation space in the Commonwealth. Going forward from 2018 to 2022, obviously what you heard earlier was a lot of information that is really relevant on the climate change mitigation side. So we have 2021, the 2021 climate bill, which was passed. It's also called the Next Generation Roadmap for Climate Change. Anyway, I always remember 2021 climate bill. So that established multiple pathways and multiple policies that we need to follow according to the legislature, which has been signed into law, in order to hit our targets for greenhouse gas reductions. So 2022, 2025, 33% 1990, 2030, 50%, and 2050 net zero. So you might ask, what does that mean? So since 1990, right, you have to get below those emission levels of 1990. This goes back to the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was passed in 2008. The Global Warming Solutions Act established benchmarks that we need to meet as the Commonwealth in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The first time we had an assessment of that was 2020. The goal was to reach 20%. The Commonwealth reached 25%. So in the period of time, while the economy is growing, reacting to change, businesses expanding, our emissions have been going down. I have not noticed a change in my quality of life as a result of those decisions to reduce emissions. We also have so that's on the mitigation side. Adaptation side, there's the climate change assessment, which we're currently going through right now, which is going to look at our multiple regions to identify our impacts that we'll experience as a result of climate change. And then we have our local partnerships, which is the MVP program, which is what I work for, where we work with cities and towns to identify your climate change adaptation priorities. So I'll go for it. Again, so just want to go a little bit more detail in the 2021 landmark bill. It's big deal, greenhouse gas emissions, 2050 net zero, that's the target, 85% reduction below those 1990 levels, and with 85% coming from greenhouse gas reductions and 15% coming from storage of carbon in our working landscapes. And there's a bit, so I'll skip that, I don't want to go too deep on that. 2025 plan's been released, June 30th it was released, and these are binding legal actions that the Commonwealth must take in order to have sector-wide energy reductions. So that's already something that's already happening right now around the state. One of the other things that we've done is we've prioritized environmental justice in the Commonwealth, and the reason why EJ is prioritized is because what we're finding is that oftentimes the people who have the fewest resources are the people who experience the impacts of climate change first, right? And so around the Commonwealth, there's been multiple years of identifying policies and practices, starting back in 2004, all the way up to 2021, for establishing environmental justice policies that the Commonwealth can follow. There is an EJ Council that has been established, and it's meeting regularly right now. It's comprised of members from throughout the Commonwealth, and their goal is to provide expert advice and recommendations on how to implement these climate change mitigation policies in a fair, just, and equitable way. So we're not harming people as a result of changes. So that's something that the Commonwealth is trying to do to be reactive to the complexities of the situation that we're in. And then a little bit more on the climate change assessment, which right now we're undergoing. I reviewed some of the documents today. But basically we have our 6 regions, they're broken up, and we're identifying human, infrastructural, natural, economic, and governance sort of threats to our way of functioning, and we're identifying each sector, each region will have their own identifications of things that we need to confront, right? So that's going to be coming out in 2023, and that's going to be used later to make our statewide hazard mitigation plan, which is also a climate adaptation plan that's going to come out in 2023. And it's going to serve as the foundation for the next iteration of the MVP program. All right, so I don't think I need to get too detailed on the climate change data because you had a really good primer on that, so I'm going to skip. I do like images that sort of underscore how important it is to address it. Heat, precipitation, coastal flooding, these are things we're addressing around the state. And but what I do want to go to is fast forward to is the Hadley's MVP plan, right? So in 2020, Hadley, we funded the climate change adaptation plan for Hadley, which was developed by citizens of Hadley, and that is something that we call the MVP plan, right? And you see it. There's an image of the cover. It's up on our website. You can look at it. But what I do want to point out is that there's the whole team. I think there's 30 people from the community who developed these priorities. There's listening sessions that were put out there so people could evaluate whether or not the priorities were in line with what people were thinking about. And the 3 things that came up at the top of the list of things for people to worry about were flooding, severe storms, and drought. That's what people had the most concerns about. So those are the broad categories that people have the most concern about. And the 3 categories that people had like specific concerns about within those broad categories are infrastructure, stormwater, the dike, communities, farms, seniors, schools, environmental concerns, habitat, Lake Warner watershed, Fort River watershed, and Chamorro Road. Apparently there's wildfires on Chamorro Road, which I did not know. But according to local residents, that's a thing that occurs. So these are the things that broadly you can say, hey, this is what we're concerned about. So we fund the planning process. We also fund the action grant process, which is the implementation process, right? So we have every single year, we have a request for funding that goes out where we fund anywhere between, small amounts of $50,000 up to $3 million in project funding to help cities and towns implement their climate change adaptation priorities, right? So here's a little history. We have 97% of the Commonwealth has gone through the program. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of funding history that we're working on, We funded over $100 million worth of implementation projects throughout the Commonwealth. And as you can see, this is the most recent map that we have of projects that have been funded. We really don't have a hardcore clustering of projects in one specific area. You see that, there's the stars, there's the circles. Those are things that show action grant projects that are taking place around the Commonwealth. So they're pretty fairly dispersed. We've been pretty lucky out here in the western part of the state with some interesting, exciting projects. I do want to talk about local projects that we have funded, because obviously you care about your neighborhood, you care about your location, right? So locally in FY22, that was this most recent fiscal year that we announced, sorry, FY23, that's one we're working on right now. In Whately, we are funding the installation of solar and battery storage on their town hall so that they can be islanded off for at least 3 hours during like a power outage event, which is going to save them, they estimated $20,000 a year in electricity bills. So that's $20,000 of taxpayer money that's just not going out, it's staying within the community, right? So we're helping them save money, improve their bottom line, and improve their ability to ride out extreme weather events. Williamsburg Public Safety Complex, they're building their own public safety complex. They came to us and they said, we have the design, we have all the funding for the construction of the shell of the building, but we don't have funding for the things that have been value engineered out, right? The solar systems, the battery systems, all the energy systems, the energy efficiency work. The town said, if you fund this and we build a building, will you pay for it? And we said, that's great, that's a perfect partnership. So Williamsburg's going to get a new public safety complex, and we're going to fund all the energy systems that are going to help them ride out extreme events as we move into this changing time. East Hampton, a little bit over to, that way. There's a hardcore deep retrofit of the Cherry Street neighborhood, which is an entire watershed, where what they've done is they basically redesigned it, and they've identified every single location where there's no trees, the stormwater gets discharged into Brickyard Brook untreated, and what's going to happen is green infrastructure is going to be installed all along the streets. You're going to get more rainwater, more stormwater getting treated like on the source. You're going to get more street tree plantings. You're going to get less flashy urban flooding events, healthier ecosystem for like people on planet. So like the interface of people and planet, right? That's what we're working for, making people's lives better. So that's something that's taking place right now. We had a construction meeting this week, and if you want to see construction taking place on Cherry Street in East Hampton, you can see it's a fun place to take my kids to look at because kids love excavators. So that's something that we're funding right now. Here's like we have this website, right? We have, like most people, we have a website now. And we have this really fun tool where you can just go around the state. You can click on anything at all that you're interested in. You can say, what is this town doing? And you can just click on their project. It gives you a brief synopsis of what they're up to. And that's resilientma.org/MVP. And it's a good space to go to get ideas. And I have to put a plug in right now. So as I was saying, MVP 2.0 is coming, which is basically our next phase of helping cities and towns up their game when it comes to making these climate adaptation priorities a reality. We're gonna be rolling this out in the next few years. We've had at least 80 participants helping us design the scope of the program. So what we're trying to do is really be reactive to local needs. We have municipal leaders, we have nonprofits, and that's our review panel and our equity council. And we're asking people, if we're gonna design something that helps you plan your future, what do you want it to look like? So that's something that's going to roll out in the near future. Spring 2023, there's going to be a launch of what it's going to look like, so stay tuned. And that's it in a nutshell for me. There's my contact information. There's Buckland on the horizon. For me, it's really kind of frustrating because I keep trying to get Shelburne to enroll in the program, but they're too busy doing too many planning processes, so I'm looking out from Shelburne on Buckland. So maybe someday they'll be enrolled, but maybe this next year. So that's it. I'll pass the baton on to our next folks.
Okay, our last speaker is Josh Stanley. He's been a firefighter paramedic since 1989. He was on the emergency management teams for both Amherst and Northampton for a total of 25 years before retiring. He has a master's degree in emergency management and published a book last year on the Connecticut River Valley flood of 1936. He'll address some of the flooding risks we face here in Hadley and how we can adapt to them. Josh.
Thank you, Randy. You good to go? So, thanks everyone for having us. Unlike probably most of the speakers tonight and the board members, I'm the professional pessimist. As Randy said, I was a firefighter, paramedic. I grew up in New York. I'm a child of the 70s. So I came up on Charlton Heston movies, and if you remember Soylent Green happened in 2022. And so everything I learned about emergency management, I learned from Charlton Heston. So starting with the airplane movies, Airport, and then moving through Soylent Green, and then we went to Omega Man, and then moved into Planet of the Apes, and then probably started all over again with, started doing it all over again. So anyway, I'm not here to be optimistic. Everyone knows where I stand on these issues. I'm less concerned with the offsetting the greenhouse gases. I'm not opposed to it. Everything, I believe all the science. I'm not here to be contrary. I'm quite far from it. But my position on these issues is to think local and act local. And here, now, you guys are at the center of, in Massachusetts, what's probably the biggest potential problem. I talk with public safety and emergency management people all the time. And what you have going on up here on that dike, running around that curve around the Honey Pot and going back down the Oxbow is probably the #1 hazard that you have going for you. I don't think that what Dr. Julie said is going to make, taking action on those things is not going to do any good, frankly. I support it. I believe the science. I just think when that finger came out and pointed at us, I'm like, I've just seen it too much go by too far. And I think that that hockey stick is gonna continue going up. So my job is to be the professional pessimist. I'm not looking at offsetting greenhouse gases. I'm trying to help you guys be better prepared and adapt to the changes that are very likely coming your way. I do that a lot through the looking back. As Randy said, I wrote a book on the history of the 1936 flood, which of course you guys remember. I don't mean literally, but this is in your backyard. So you're obviously very familiar. It's not the first time, right? As Dr. Julie said, 20,000 years ago, we would have been standing under 1 mile of ice, and probably around 10,000 years ago, we would have been underneath Lake Hitchcock, and somewhere around 10,000, somewhere around 6,000 years ago around Rocky Hill, Connecticut, a natural earthen dam broke and created the Connecticut River, 410 miles from the Canadian border down to the Long Island Sound. Anyone recognize this? You guys have all seen this picture. This is on the notch looking down. That was before the Oxbow. So what you see here, and I don't have to tell you this, this is a map from 1831, obviously. We're right up top there, and that little notch here. And this is another bow that looks very similar to the one where we are now. In 1840, a spring freshet happened. A bridge was built, a covered bridge across this area. Ice built up behind it, water piled up behind that, as happens in spring freshets. And instead of the bridge giving way, which is what normally happens, the bridge held and the river won and created the Oxbow. (1840). If you missed the headline, there it is. This is from a USGS study. Here's post-Oxbow. This is 1936 flood. That's in Northfield, Northfield. I don't have any time to get, you're not a hydrogeomorphologist, are you? Not necessarily. No, but we know one. Yeah, we can call one if we need to. The river over 410 miles changes. So what you're seeing up in Northfield is very different from what you're seeing in Hadley and Northampton and what you're seeing down in Holyoke and down into Connecticut around Hartford. So what happens along the path of the river changes. So it's not always an apples-to-apples comparison. But what I can tell you, having spent 25 years between Amherst and Northampton, watching the river come up and down for many years, is that what happens here, the river gets very narrow and not so deep. And when the ice builds up and when the water levels go up, most of the action is happening right here in our backyard, all right? So I've got lots of photos of Hartford and Middletown, and I was up in Vermont at the Vermont Emergency Management Conference on Tuesday talking about these issues. What happened up there looks very different at this time. This is where all the action happens, right here, that notch where the river gets very narrow and shallow. It tends to build up. This is right here. This is 1927. That's your dike right there, about a quarter mile or so north. In the aftermath of the 1927 flood, whoops, this is 1927, that dike was built. Somewhere after the 1927 flood, the government's response was to put that dike system in. So it was in before 36, before the big flood. And it was essentially left at that point. So it was left in and left. And I'll compare it to what happened in 36 in Northampton in just a bit, because it is really a tale of two cities. This is here. I believe this is West Street in 1936. So that dike was put in 27 or around 30. 36 happens, and it rolls right over the top of that, and that's West Street. This should look familiar. This is the bridges going across Northampton. And that is in 1936. I love these old photos. This is, I believe, in Northampton looking towards Hadley. That's the bridge going across now the rail trail bridge. So you can see what happened at that point. This is post 36. And they're just describing what happened around how the path of the river changed. Listen, the punchline here for me, the river always wins. It's just a question of time. We can keep going, but we can do everything we're going to do. One day this is going to happen here. I just don't want it to be on our watch, or our kids' watch, frankly. I don't have kids. I don't want it to be on my dog's watch. So after 36, 1938, the Long Island Express, hurricane comes right up the Connecticut River Valley. Never happened before. Almost happened again last year with Henri, 2020. I'm losing track of time. Henri, for about 24 hours, was on path to come up the Connecticut River Valley, and then for whatever reason, it decided to go out to sea. But there was a good period of time where it was coming up the valley again. So, tale of two cities. 1936, flood happens. For whatever reason, I don't know about the politics of this thing, but in Northampton, they handle it very differently. So you're probably familiar with the dike systems over there and the flood walls. They just threw money at this problem in a much different way than Hadley did. They built concrete flood walls. They built a pump station with 3 huge diesel engines that are still there from 1936. And as a result of that, they're in a very different place. Had that happened over here at the same time, you would all be in a different place as well, not quite as vulnerable. They moved the Mill River. The Mill River used to go right underneath City Hall. And post 36, they moved it south several miles. A tremendous project. This is around Smith College now, West Street in Northampton. They're actually moving the path of the Mill River. This is on West Street in just outside the Smith College campus. And that infrastructure is essentially still there. Fast forward to 2009. Are you guys familiar with what happened in 2009 over by the honey pot? I wasn't. This is in the Gazette, or this is in the Globe, but it was in the Gazette as well. I was not aware until I started speaking to you public safety people and emergency management people just how close you came to losing that corner by the honey pot. And I'll call on our mythical hydrogeomorphologist friend, because if that thing, the last time we were here in April, we talked about this, if that corner started to go, there's no guarantee saying where it's going to stop. I thought, and I'll show you some animations, I thought it was coming straight down West Street, because that's where the curve happens. Turns out your vulnerabilities are a little further west. And if that corner starts to go, erosion is a dicey thing. We cannot predict just when it's going to stop. In Northampton, 2011, we had 4 federally declared disasters. We had Snowtober, and then we had Irene. This was the infrastructure that was put in around 38 post-1936 flood. We actually put this system up. It was the first time in 50 years. I don't know what the 50-year event was, but it was the first time that it was actually used. So that's the bridge over the Mill River. It would be Smith College is to the right, and then the power plant is to the left. There it is. So that's the power plant that I showed you that old photo. So we actually erected that system. Didn't need it, but I'll tell you, you guys were here in 2011. We thought we were going to. As my friend Andrew here said, this is a well-documented problem. All right, this is not anything new. This has been documented in that report that he showed. As I was researching this talk tonight, I have nothing new to offer you. You got a big problem in your backyard here. I mean, you guys have all seen these headlines. Here's my fancy animation. Get ready. So you should all be oriented now. You know where the problem is. This is looking north on Middle Street or West Street. And this is where I thought the problem was coming. I'm getting seasick. I never watched it this before. All right, so everyone's oriented. So here's where I thought our problem was, and it turns out this is where the problem was. This is where this sort of erosion started happening. They put a big spoil pile out there and staged some heavy equipment, and it was going to be go time. They were ready. And they put a Band-Aid patch on this. And I think, as far as I know, and someone please correct me, as far as I know, that's been patched and left, and that was 2009. And I don't know of any other mitigation or repairs that have gone on in this area. All right? Here's all Big Bad Northampton with our flood walls and pumping stations and everything else we have over there. So again, showing you the same problem from a different angle. That's where I thought the problem was. Here's where your real problem is. The only thing I can do is say it again, but this time present a potential solution. I'm not optimistic that it's going to work, frankly, but the programs that Andrew's talking about with this MVP program are going to at least get you started. That's a big, expensive problem you have out there. But what you need to do is understand what the scope of the issue before you can start to address it. All right, so get some eyes on there with civil engineers, start to unravel the problem, and then you can start to figure out how to address it. Because it's just gonna happen. I mean, I don't know why it hasn't, frankly. In my philosophy on these things, and I think it's just because I'm getting old, I was at the Trade Center attacks both times, in '93 and 2001. Right, I grew up in New York. I understand large-scale disasters. And I'm getting old now, and I don't want to come out and deal with a major event in my backyard. So the easiest disaster for me is the one that doesn't happen. Right? So that's all I got for you. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I thank you for your time. another slide?
No, I don't think so. I think we're good. Thank you all for that, for your information. It's very informative. Anybody have any questions for any of these speakers? Feel free. I'm going to, if you raise your, raise your hand and I will call on you, okay? Please.
I'm just wondering, Jeff, this is for you. I'm just wondering if can you tell us what happens farther downstream if this dike problem is not addressed here?
I don't know. So I can tell you, I honestly don't know, and I think everyone will be hard pressed to give you a credible answer. I can tell you that in 1936, the Vernon Dam, just north of the Massachusetts border into Vermont, about 6 miles north. In 1936, the Northampton MSP barracks called out to the general public that that dam had failed. March 19 into 20, around 11 p.m. on the night of the 19th. They predicted that the entire Connecticut River Valley south of Vernon, down through Middletown, through Hartford, down to the Long Island Sound, would have been wiped away. That was the prediction according to the USGS at that time. This is a different scenario, and I don't know is the answer. I think it's going to be a bad day here, and probably it's going to, if I had to guess, we'll have to fall back on our geomorphologist friends again, but I think it would be caught at the Holyoke Dam. The Holyoke Dam, that's the third dam down there. That's the third time at that in the Holyoke with that dam. First one was in 1900, and it lasted like 24 hours or something. I'm pretty sure they got it right this time. I'm pretty sure that the Holyoke Dam would be stressed, but it would hold. But not here, not here.
Melinda?
I was told that the Hadley Meadows, everybody hear me? I was told that the Hadley Meadows floods, like that's a normal thing.
Yes?
So you're talking about water coming over it, I mean, doesn't that already happen?
I think the difference is that this area has been built up to such a degree that it's no longer a meadow, and that if that were to go and create a pass-through of the Connecticut River Valley, the Connecticut River, that all of a sudden where we're standing right now is no longer a meadow. This has been repurposed, right? I mean, so yeah, one time going back pre-1800, right up until the year 1800, this was strictly an agriculture community. The river would rise, the farmers would move back, the river would go down, and people would move in. We moved with the river. The Connecticut River became a major corridor around the War of 1812 because there was so much coastal warfare going on that they decided they were cleverly going to use the Connecticut River. And that's where the Industrial Revolution started. So yes, at one time, yeah, sure, we would have been standing in a meadow, but we're not standing in a meadow now. So when this area floods, it's going to be a problem.
Daniel?
I believe that sometimes when the water comes up in the meadow, it comes in from the south and it backs up like a toilet. It doesn't go over the dike per se, it comes up that way. And if you drive sometimes or have any time to go behind Middle Street, that's what they call the bank. That's where the flood water wants to go, is the Middle Street, that Middle Street south. But I asked how climate change is going to affect perhaps hurricanes. That's actually we've had floods from hurricanes and long and other events. And I was just wondering how climate change would affect something like hurricanes, because we've had hurricanes here for thousands of years.
Sure. We've only been here since 1620, but sure, there's been hurricanes. I'll say briefly, and then I'll hand it off to Dr. Julia. The infrastructure was built to handle a certain trend, and it's largely been maintained. That thing's come out to about 100 years old. If the systems do change, if the trends do change, if that dog walking changes its pattern, the system's just not built to that. It was probably not built to withstand that in 27. It was not built to withstand that in 36 and 38. It just didn't work. I mean, the proof's in the pudding.
Right. The science on hurricanes right now is that hurricanes are not necessarily increasing in frequency, but increasing in strength. So, you know, we didn't know 20 years ago what was happening. The trend now is that we have more hurricanes that are stronger. You know, whether they hit here, who knows? I mean, that's just bad luck. You know, if you remember, I think it was Irene that took out a lot of the Berkshires. You know, that took out a lot of roads and road systems. And you should know at least that the state had a study where they looked at where every road crosses a river of any size, and then they've got a plan to increase the size of culverts so that you don't have people cut off like that. So that kind of planning has already been happening, and they're implementing that. But something as big as this, that's going to be hard for anyone to plan for.
And if you remember last year, the Hurricane Henri, we were talking about before we got started, Henri came up, and for about 24 hours, if you watch CNN or Fox or anything else, there was that path. You know how they do that projection. It was actually going to take the 38 path right up the Connecticut River. And I mean, I was giggling, right, because this is what I do. But for some reason, then it just decided to go left, right, and then right off into the ocean. Why? Who knows? Because it's a hurricane, you can do it at once. But there was a good 24 hours where it was going to take that trajectory. It's a long shot. It's only happened once that we tracked. I'm sure it's happened before, but only within recorded history once in 38. Huge devastation here. Not from flooding, more from wind. So, you know, spring freshets happen here, hurricanes happen on a different pattern. The devastation, you know, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter.
What's the main goal of the climate declaration emergency? Is it to push?
Hang on, you got to ask that question after they read it, okay? I want you to ask questions that these people have spoken about, and then the Climate Change Committee is going to read the declaration, and then you're free to ask that question then, please. Thank you. Mr. Phil.
For the first speaker, isn't pollution or carbon footprint or whatever you want to refer to it as, isn't it directly related to the population of the town, the country, and the world?
Absolutely, because if you look at studies about what's the holding capacity of the planet, if everybody in the world lived the way we do, that we're used to, the holding capacity of the planet is about 2.5 billion people. We're approaching 9 billion. And a lot of those people won't live the way we do. This is why the transition to cleaner, renewable future is really important, because we lived through certain mistakes. We don't want to continue making those mistakes. So that in places where there's development going on, there are plenty of places with plenty of solar and plenty of wind. We just have to build that infrastructure there, so they can bypass the fossil fuel part. In order to keep global emissions down. So does that answer your question?
Susan?
Actually, not a question, but maybe an addendum. Can I maybe add that? So the amount of impact we have on the globe is not just a function of the number of people, but how well developed we are and what technology we use. So it's really a function of population times economy times technology, which is why, you know, say 5,000 people in India have a much lower impact on the global climate than the 5,000 of us here in Hadley. So if we reduce our, you know, use of, or through the technology, through like renewables, if we have less of a carbon footprint, you multiply that with the 5,000, we have a lower impact on the climate. So it's a function of both economy, technology, and population.
Dr. Z.
Yeah, certainly the project that's coming before the town meeting is I think, strong on platitudes, but weak on what we should do about it. And one of the ones you did suggest is the levees or the dikes. And the point was well made. The water does not come over the dike, the water comes in from the south side. Now, does it mean we will have to create a levee all the way around and go to Bay Road and raise that area as well, all the way? Or do we do like they do in the Chocalaya River in Louisiana, on the corner where allegedly it's going to flood, just put those pilings in like they do there? So is that our suggestion, to repair the levee, to repair the dike, and make Hadley a moat, so to speak?
So I can address the complexities of multi-year engineering projects. So we have a number of grants that are currently in the process of being implemented throughout the Commonwealth. And don't what you find first is you need to define the scope of the problem. We fund three things: planning, design, permitting, and construction. That's what we fund through the MVP program. So oftentimes there's a large universe of possibilities that you're working within, and you begin the process of identifying your problem, and then you move more towards permitting after you've done your design, and then you do construction. So I think when you come to like these scenarios, we say this is one possible future that you're talking about. As you get deeper into the planning and design stage, you end up with a completely different outcome. And so that's always like worth keeping in mind when you're thinking about the next 5 to 8 years of project implementation. So you don't have to come up with a solution tonight. You can say like, this is something we're interested in pursuing, and then you can kind of set the cart in that direction of pursuing a potential solution.
Certainly, the one point I forgot to add was that we cannot unilaterally do something like this, because this is a federal control, the FEMA regulations, federally controlled. So if we repair our dikes or raise it slightly, we're putting the water into Hatfield, Northampton. You cannot do that. You can't even dump a load of sand in the floodplain now without being fined. So this is going to be a huge undertaking. Federal government, state government, environmental impact statements. Are we willing to put up with something like that for the next 10 years, 15 years? Because that's how long it'll probably take.
I suppose I would put you, what's the alternative, sir?
I see you, Dan, hang on. Fred?
One thing I haven't heard anybody bring up yet, and I'm wondering how much effect it has on global warming. I've done some studying on my own and learned that 11 to 14 million years ago, the temperature of the Earth is actually 50 degrees hotter than it is right now. And the reason was we had a lot of volcanic activity during that period of time in history. We are experiencing something like that again right now. I don't know if you're familiar with, anybody here is familiar with Tonga. It's an island in the Pacific that erupted in January and was said to be the worst, most catastrophic event in recorded history. And that alone would affect climate change for at least a year. That's only one. There's several others that have fired off since. Plus Hawaii, for the last 30 years, has become extremely active. I'd like to see somebody come in here that's an expert and talk about that.
Yeah. We're happy to provide the expertise for that because generally speaking, if you look at volcanic activity over time, you're sure there are pulses, but that is minor compared to the human impact on the atmosphere. So you're right, volcanic eruptions do come and go. They generally isolate or insulate and reflect sunlight back, which is, and cool the planet, like Pinatubo cooled the planet by a full degree when in the Philippines. That volcano went off, but it doesn't last very long because it dissipates and so on. But generally speaking, it's very clear if you look at the amount of CO2 in emissions coming from the inside of the planet, it's minuscule compared to the industrial part. So you're right, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's not what's causing what's happening now. Okay.
Daniel.
Getting back to this talk about the dike, I was a little bit involved with the repairs that we had before. And it's a little frustrating. The Army Corps of Engineers, no place to be found. Now, if you think that the town of Hadley can come over here and get this kind of dike going, which maybe we need, maybe we don't, but we need to do something. It's not something we can do, and the Army Corps would have to come in and do that. But again, they like to give you the rules, but don't come up with any kind of cash to do it.
I'll introduce you to my friend Andrew here, who brought his checkbook.
No, I know this firsthand. They're not around.
I'm telling you what, my solution to these problems is a relatively new program, this MVP program. I'm sorry, Alex, I'm messing with you. This MVP program is new, and it's designed to address these problems. So it's 2 years old or so, less.
2018.
So it's a new program, and all we're saying is take this first step so you could get the scope of the problem. And I don't know, Dr. Z, to your point, I understand that it might be coming from somewhere other than over the dike. I'm not a civil engineer, all right? All I'm suggesting is that you have an analysis, get a study, get some civil engineers in here so you guys understand the scope of the problem. And is it going to look like Louisiana around here? I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but you should at least be informed so you guys can make decisions.
Yes.
Andrew, for the MVP program, does a climate change declaration have to be in place to get the money?
So the requirements for the MVP program are that you have completed the community resilience building process, which is something that the town has gone through. And that is our one access point, right? So that's it. So we don't, I personally, I do not get involved in local decision making except for listening to people who have concerns about how climate change is impacting their communities already.
So the town has already gone through the process to be able to get the money from MVP.
So that is a thing that has happened, correct?
Thank you.
So I can provide further insight on like our review process, how we identify stuff. It's a competitive grant. We have a review committee. We have multiple people reviewing grants, and we usually award normally $10 to $20 million a year in funding.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I guess I just want to remind for those who weren't in the room, was it 2020 when we did that, or 2019? So we had like a whole day talking about sitting around the tables and thinking about where our vulnerabilities are in town and what people think. And I know that the flooding off the Connecticut River came up, as Andrew pointed out, like as a really big, important thing of like the 30 people that were there that day or something that all kind of came together and talked about it. And I also remember, because I've known about this program because I've worked in this field since it started in 2018, that Andrew told us that it's getting more and more competitive. And like the longer we wait, the less likely we are to like get in and be successful, you know. So just to say that we have a better chance of getting funding from this program by applying, you know, this year, next year, instead of, 3 years from now, and we probably would have done a few years ago. So just to put a little bit of incentive on that. And Andrew, can you just say a little bit more? So we've got that stuff in place, but then we have to put some paperwork in or something.
Yeah, so for us, every year we do an expression of interest, which is our winter time, where we issue a call for people to give us their ideas. And last year we had 150 expressions of interest that are submitted. And what we do is we say, Town X, you're interested in a culvert. And we say we have 80 towns who are interested in culvert replacements right now. How can we troubleshoot and debug your project in a way that makes it more competitive, right? And so we have our core values. We're looking at public engagement, right? Because we want people to feel that success. We want that empowerment of people thinking like, this isn't terrifying. This is something that I can do something about, right? So that's our initial first, we want public engagement. We want to see projects that are embracing nature-based solutions, right? So I'm just going to walk you through our most frequent flyer, which is the culvert, right? So if it's a culvert, culverts are failing, right? Why are they failing? Because the storms that we have now are not the same storms that engineers had in their designs books back in the early 70s when most of these things were being built, right? So bigger, better culverts are being proposed to us, right? So we say, like, wait a second, look at the watershed. Yes, we want to fund the replacement of the culvert, but is there a giant abandoned mall within the watershed that is contributing a huge slug of water into this watershed, making it flood more frequently? So we say maybe there's something you can do to engage the property owner to work on a process of beginning a process of increasing green infrastructure so you can capture, store, and treat stormwater before it goes into the culvert, making it less of a problem in the future, right? So this is like our thought process for how we get people involved, right? Is there a land preservation element? So for something like this, you know, we don't normally fund hard infrastructure when it comes to like barriers, right? So we have a lot of people who come to us for seawall funding all the time. And what we know about seawalls is that seawalls make coastal erosion way worse. You put it there, the wave action kind of moves the sand around, and you end up with a worse problem than you had. I'm sure it's more complex than that. but well, that's so oftentimes people say, we need a seawall. So we say we can't fund seawalls because we prioritize nature-based solutions, which is that broader holistic thinking. So when it comes to something like this, if you say, we want a big earthen mound, that's more complicated for us. But if you can begin to say, how do we understand the scope of the problem? What are things we can do to engage property owners so we can get people thinking about the complexity of the situation? It might take you 2 years to come with a solution. That's fine. You know, sometimes like when we rush to these outcomes of like, we have to have an outcome, we have to have a solution now, we miss a lot of good possible alternate realities or scenarios, that's a better word. So we're encouraging people to say, we want to do something about this. We think we know like how we might want to go. We would like to spend some time figuring this out. So that's something that for us is if you involve people in the solution, multi-generations in the solution, then you end up with something that you might end up in a different place from where you thought you were going to end up, but the journey is something that we're willing to fund. And we have a cap on $3 million for implementation funding. So for you, if you say at some point in the future you do get to the point where you could apply to FEMA or BRIC, which is the new term for the hazard mitigation grants, they have like a different world of funding that we don't have access to. So then there's like a benefit cost analysis, which is something that is really complicated to do. Potentially we could help you fund the benefit cost analysis. And then you're playing in a different world, right? So our goal is to help you be positioned for success in whatever avenue you choose. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of like our thought process.
Andy, you had your hand up earlier.
I have so many questions. You talked about the potential disaster of the Connecticut River. Could you give us one or two more other potential areas of worry that we might want to address?
Here along the Connecticut River, it's actually outlined quite well in that 2020. It's still a draft report. 9 out of 10 disasters in New England in general are related to flood. So I mean that's bread and butter for us. So the top 3 hazards, I was looking at the report, just getting ready for this, and Andrew probably knows them better, but they're all related to some sort of flooding pertaining to the river. My focus has been on the levee, but as Dr. Z pointed out, it could be coming from somewhere else, right? My point is that you want to know, you want to get an analysis to better understand how to address the real problem. I don't know, that's not my thing. Because I'm not a civil engineer. But if this were in my backyard, I would want a team of civil engineers on this to say, here's your top 3 areas, and start a years-long conversation that presents a variety of solutions so you can take that next step to answer your question thoroughly. I don't know, but I'd want to find out if I were you guys.
Do we know if we had a flood similar to the one in 36, do you know how it would affect our current public safety infrastructure, particularly the buildings?
Yeah, so in general, and I'll try not to geek out too much on the Flood Protection Act of 1936, but really 36 was a watershed moment because it activated a lot of New Deal acts that were funded that go miles up and down the river. So you'll see the right across the river in Northampton, that's one example. And if you go down to West Springfield, you'll see the dikes and flood walls. Springfield down to Hartford, if you come up 91, when you're passing the Science Center Museum, you see these giant flood walls. I don't think you're talking about a situation like that here. If you go north, up into Vermont and New Hampshire, you get reservoirs that are built miles away. and then they sort of channel the water down through a series of dams that are controlled, out of Taunton. So coming up with a solution is complex, and it's going to be specific to this area. That's actually one of the big problems. The solution that you're going to come up with here in Hadley is not going to work anywhere else. There's no cookie cutter solution to these problems, and that's why they're so big and expensive. Did that answer your question, sir?
Well, my question was how a flood would affect our public safety infrastructure. Would our police station be flooded? Would the fire station be flooded?
Fire station's still down the street, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I believe too now.
They're all in the floodplain.
Yeah, I would be concerned. Yes, sir. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who could say absolutely yes or no, but if I were the emergency management director here in town, I would be very concerned, yes.
Sure.
I think this is a question for Andrew. The IRA funding that's coming into place, do you foresee that as being a kind of window of opportunity? Because one question I have is it seems like there's sort of a window now with infrastructure money. If a town like this is prepared to take advantage of that, soon that may be a window that's only available in the next few years. So I'm just curious, how are you thinking about that at the state level?
What we know is that the ARPA funding has really expanded our ability to fund projects. Right now we're just this current round of funding is our allotment of the ARPA funding. The Infrastructure Reinvestment Act is something that we don't really have any decision. The legislature and the governor, and they make their decisions, and then we end up with what we get. But it has increased funding throughout the Secretariat on climate change adaptation related projects. I think, so to look back at the numbers, you've got over $100 million going to urban forestry. They got a lot of funding. And then EEA, there's specific funding that we have earmarked that I don't want to get an exact number to because I want to make sure it's accurate. But the funding has been increased as a result of the Infrastructure Reinvestment Act. IRA. So I'm going to get the acronym.
Sure.
This is a question for Mr. Smith.
Can you speak up, please?
Pardon?
Can you speak up, please?
Yes. This is a question from Mr. Smith. During your presentation, you brought up the term environmental justice and vulnerable populations. I'm wondering if you could define those, and what defines a vulnerable population?
So the 2021 environmental justice policy is what defines it around the Commonwealth. So if I can pull this up, maybe? Yeah, okay. Uh-oh. At least I can get you there. Believe it or not, Hadley has an environmental justice population. In the recent mapping, there's three criteria. There's the main criteria are English isolation, income, and then so English isolation, income, and then I think it used to be like minority status, but I think it might be minority status. And I think I want to get it right. That's what I'll look up there. But when you look at Hadley, so there's a really detailed mapping process where the two main ones that are most relevant are English isolation and income. You see that this really goes around the Commonwealth, and you identify by census tracts, concentrations that exceed thresholds, and these are the maps that we work with. So there's an EJ population in Hadley. It's a new thing. It wasn't there in the old maps, but now in the new maps, Hadley has an EJ population. So I don't know if I answered your question properly. I recommend.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about it.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find. Let me find the exact answer for you.
What's the definition of that?
All right. Let me go there. 1 second. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Let me go 1 second. I'll find it for you real quick.
Can I make a comment on while you're doing that? So there is a difference between what is an EJ community and what is a vulnerable population, and we have found through medical research, through social science research, is that people, for example, over 65 or over 70 are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat. Very young children, people who have medical conditions, who take medication that make them more sensitive to heat. So it depends a little bit on the hazard and the type of population, who is most vulnerable. And a detailed vulnerability assessment for Hadley would have to look at age, socioeconomic status, linguistic isolation, and the particular types of hazards we're facing. So we only have looked at matters of flooding. So, for example, if people have not an access to their own vehicle, they cannot get out of a flooded area, right? If they're isolated, they don't understand English, and they don't understand what the warnings are. That's a particular hazard. Single women heads of household are more vulnerable than full families. So we just know that statistically, and that kind of thing would have to be assessed in very fine detail to really get a grip on who needs to be helped in what way.
In terms of impacted populations, in Canada, where you're prone to flooding in areas, would the farmers be considered a impacted population?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an economic impact, right? Whose businesses, whose livelihoods would be disrupted? Absolutely, that would be a considered factor in that kind of a detailed analysis of vulnerability. It's not just, who is in the flood zone or who is exposed to heat. I mean, farmers work outside all the time. You don't have air conditioning out there. That's a big problem, right? So that's the kind of thing that would have to be taken into consideration in how do we adapt to this problem.
A big focus on recovery, post-event, say there was a flood here, and this pertains just nationally, is getting local economy back up and running. This is an agriculture community, you are farmers, that would be a priority, bottom line.
So the definition's up there. I don't know if you want me to read it or if someone has a really good speaking voice and can read it in a way that is compelling, but that's the definition. So a neighborhood that meets one or more of the following criteria. Annual median household income is not more than 65% of the statewide annual median income. 2, minorities comprise 40% or more of the population. And 3, 25% or more of the households lack English proficiency. And 4, minorities are 25% more of the population, and the income doesn't exceed 150% of statewide. Right? So those are there's a whole mapping process using census data, and that's the definition that's used to plot out the location of where the EJ polygons are in the Commonwealth. So it's codified in law, and it's the law. So that's why we follow it.
So Hadley's on the map for qualifying for that?
Yes.
Where is Tonga and Hadley, for example? Are they in there too, or just?
Well, I don't know. Let me see. Let me go check it out.
Pull that map back up. I'm just curious all around. We're the only.
Pretty sure it's safe to say nowadays most communities are going to qualify. Well, this is the law, so everyone's going to be qualified or responsible for following it.
I'll zoom in a little bit. All right, we got Hadley, parts of Northampton. I don't see Sunderland up here. There's some of Sunderland, yes. Whately. Green. It gets really specific. So there's it might be income. Let's see. So yeah, I can pull the code. If you're really interested, I can pull the color coding up, because there's 1, 2, or 3 criteria are met. There's one color for one criteria, another color for 2 criteria, and 3 colors for 3 criteria. The important thing is there's a process, and I can go into a deep dive in the data if you want. But we probably don't all want to be going into a deep dive in the data. That's my hunch. That's my hunch. Okay, cool. Thanks.
I didn't see where that definition said farmers, but that's the first point. The second question I have is, there's about a dozen dams on the river from top to bottom, and there's also Harriman Reservoir, which was built to handle spring floods and water from hurricanes and things. Many of these dams are used now for exclusively generating electricity and for recreation. Harriman Reservoir, which was to accommodate surprising flows of water, is now used for recreation. The dams are owned by different companies, managed by different companies that don't seem to speak to each other. For example, when we had a big flood with Hurricane Irene, I had a friend, Cinda and Chuck, lived at the Barton Cove, and here was the storm the size of Europe coming, and they kept the water behind the dam full to the top. There doesn't seem to be any effort to be proactive to manage the water flows. The Holyoke Dam is 28 feet tall with like 6 or 8 foot flashboards, and they held the water back. They could have made the flood a lot less damaging by trying to work to mitigate the water flow. My friends, Melwood Farms and the Savage, their farms were stripped down to prehistoric boulders. And what was different about that night than the million years before was the lack of management of the dams. Could MVP funding or anything be used to set up a way to have the different owners and different companies that manage the dams coordinate and try to be proactive in lessening the damage that we've seen over a number of floods?
It's a complex issue, sir. So there are over 3,000 dams in Massachusetts widely, I can tell you that. And essentially they were built in the 1800s and early 1900s for industry, right? And then what you're talking about is the hydroelectric dams. There's 13 along the Connecticut River in the Deerfield, right? And those were built between 1907 and 1913, roughly. Those are hydroelectric dams, as opposed to the agricultural dams and all the other dams that are really involved with complex removal process with hazardous materials and that sort of thing. The politics around flood control are overwhelming, and you're going to start talking with EPA and DEP and everyone else.
And FERC. So FERC is the one that sets the conditions for the Holyoke Dam. I worked on this for years in Holyoke, and they're what's called a run-of-the-river dam, which means that whatever the river is doing, they also have to allow to. If it goes this way, it has to equal that way. I don't have to say it. A has to equal B, or I don't know. I'm not saying myself very. I'm not explaining it very accurately. But they can't hold water back. They have to let the river flow. That's their restriction under their FERC licensing, is that if it's 100 cubic feet per second, they have to allow 100 cubic feet per second to flow over.
Yeah, but they're 34 feet tall. They are holding water back, and that's a lot of water. And you've got all the dams. It seems like they would use it not only to generate electricity, which is a wonderful thing, but to manage the water so we get less damage here.
One thing I think just to put it out there, is a lot of these, when you're talking about the hydroelectric dams, they're private entities, right? And it gets complex. And frankly, I'm not the guy to talk to about the politics and the economics of that. I appreciate where you're coming from. I understand. I don't have an answer for you, and I don't think that this project is going to generate discussion of what happens in Hadley or Vernon or anywhere else around that particular issue. I understand what you're saying. I just don't think we're not in a position to deal with it right now. I get it. What I would say is that you should put yourself in a position to deal with it when it happens again. So think about it from that perspective.
You've got something to look forward to.
Yeah, I get it.
Eric.
I get it.
Question on flood control. I understand the river drops as it heads south, but from over here to over here, the river is essentially the same height. And the dike is holding it back here. Every year it floods up from Aquavita Meadows. I don't go back to 1936, but in the 80s, I very clearly remember the water covered over Route 9 before the Coolidge Bridge.
Sure.
It came up in the backyard of the next house behind Essalon, behind West Street.
Yep.
And that's minor flooding.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you put a giant dike all around that part there and then raise the Coolidge Bridge another 20 feet? Or, I mean, I'm wondering about the logistics of even being possible to control such a thing.
Again, I thought I made the point to Dr. Z. I'll reiterate. I don't know. But here's what I'll say. If I can get you guys to support this MVP project, that simply is the first step in understanding what needs to happen, not actually taking action on it. Because what Andrew's talking about, he's going to pony up $3 million or so. That's not going to fix your problem. That's going to get you to understand what it needs, what you need to do, where you need to go find that FEMA resilient infrastructure community money. You know, you're going to need to put together a cocktail of grants that are going to end up actually solving the problem. But the first step in solving the problem is understanding the scope, right? That's the Albert Einstein, 90% of the problem is understanding the scope of the problem, then 10% is actually implementing it. I'm just asking you to get that first down. And I guess finally what I'll say, not finally because I can talk all night, but I wish we could separate these issues, right? When you're talking about these environmental justice issues and the vulnerable populations, I understand them, all right? Believe me, when we set up shelters in Amherst and Northampton, those are the folks who show up, right? Because everyone else, anyone who can get out of Dodge, when the flood's coming, they go to the ATM, they gas up the SUV, and they go. It's everyone else who comes to the shelters. And I've set up dozens of shelters in 25 years. I wish we could separate the issues. But the bottom line is supporting these initiatives basically costs you nothing. It's just the right thing to do. So that's the way I support them. It's just the right thing to do. Everything else I've been focused on tonight is really just nuts and bolts. This is in your backyard. So we're talking about two separate things here. They've sort of come from the same place, but ultimately people in Hadley are people in Hadley, and that's the name of the game.
I just have a question about this MVP program. Is that a grant process for the town to get money to solve these issues? And if these issues are so bad, why do we need a grant to solve them? Where's FEMA? Where's the federal government? Where's the state government? Where's the Army Corps of Engineers to kick in?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems like you're dangling a carrot in front of us to hopefully we grab onto it.
Andrew's going to represent MVP, but...
Yeah. So, yeah, we are a competitive grant program. We do have criteria that we have to meet, so we can't just... Here's the real... I want to be really clear. So, the way this was set up was always designed to be bottom-up, right? We didn't want to have a person from the state show up in your town and say, here's what you need to do. And I think the fact that it's a bottom-up program at the very beginning where we wanted to make sure we were listening to people, we were asking people what they needed to do, and then providing funding to help them implement it. I think that's what makes it different. So I understand the complexities of saying, here's what you should do, right? And we're going to give you money and make you do it. I think that takes away some of your agency as a town. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to promote that sense of like agency within your solutions. So the answer is, we don't want to tell you what to do. That's why there's no one showing up with a checkbook saying, do that. We want towns to develop solutions that work for them. And that's why it's a competitive grant program, and that's why we have, we have a limited pot of money, and people are trying to develop solutions with that limited pot of money. So if I don't think we want to live in a world where me, Andrew, shows up and tells you what to do. And I think that's why we don't just give people money. So.
Could you move in the climate declaration and see how that ties into what we've been talking
We will.
about?
I think we're pretty well done here. But
I wish this were an apolitical issue, to your point. I mean, I don't necessarily understand the connections either, but this is where we are. This is where we are.
Okay. At this time, I will ask the Climate Change Committee members to come up so they can read their draft declaration, and then we can talk about that.
So if you have copies on your table, please follow along. If you have any notes and suggestions. This is completely different than the first draft that the select board looked at. We certainly listened to some of your comments about that. So resolution declaring a climate emergency. Declaring that the climate crisis is a matter of grave, urgent public concern is a crucial step for aligning Hadley residents, businesses, and government with the need for a timely response concerning the current and long-term threat of a global climate breakdown. The effect of climate change has already damaged and endangered Hadley infrastructure, private property, livelihoods, and the natural environment, and will continue to do so. Declaring that the climate crisis deserves our immediate attention demonstrates that our government agencies acknowledge that addressing climate change requires immediate action.
On April 22nd, 2016, world leaders from 175 countries ratified the Paris Agreement, an international treaty that recognizes the threat of climate change and the urgent need to address it. They agreed to keep the global average temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit.
In Massachusetts, Governor Baker signed comprehensive climate change legislation in March 2021 that brings the state's climate change policy ambitions in line with the Paris Agreement. This legislation was codified into law and states Massachusetts' commitment to achieving zero emissions by 2050. It advances the Commonwealth's efforts to reduce climate warming emissions, protect vulnerable communities from dangerous pollution levels, and in so doing provides over 100,000 new jobs in the state's clean energy sector. An additional climate change bill was just signed by Governor Baker to further accelerate the transition to a just, clean, and safe climate future.
The climate crisis not only poses threats, it also presents a major opportunity to invest in clean, healthy energy, transportation, and land use systems that will deliver immediate and sustained benefits to all and reduce further damage from climate change. In a world facing extreme challenges from accelerating climate change, Hadley residents understand the importance of taking steps to protect the earth and its inhabitants. We can envision a sustainable, regenerative future and wish to join the growing movement of local communities in Massachusetts, the U.S., and worldwide to express our concerns to political leaders everywhere. We can join hands in creating and executing bold plans for a prosperous economy, a safe and healthy environment, and thriving, inclusive communities.
Hadley has an engaged town government and has undertaken some important steps regarding climate and the environment by pursuing the Green Community designation and holding Hadley's first ever Climate Day in April 2022. This climate emergency declaration is an expression of that active concern and a constructive engagement to keep Hadley safe and thriving in perpetuity. The town of Hadley recognizes that the main cause of the climate crisis is from burning fossil fuels. The town of Hadley agrees and declares that the resulting climate emergency threatens our town, state, nation, and humans the world over, as well as the natural life support system on which we all depend. The town of Hadley wishes to express its solidarity with other local governments who have recognized this urgent threat. The town of Hadley furthermore agrees to come into alignment with the climate policy goals set by the governor and state legislator. This implies the town's recognition of the moral imperative and unprecedented opportunity to do its part in stabilizing the climate, remedy environmental harms, create clean energy jobs, and improve human lives. The town of Hadley declares its commitment to develop and then implement a well-considered plan to meet this challenge.
Residents of the town of Hadley, represented by the select board, call on all town government departments, Hadley civic groups, businesses, and residents to commit to a climate mobilization effort to bring townwide carbon emissions to net zero by the year 2050, a local policy goal which is directly aligned with the state's climate policy goal. We also recognize the need for increased state and federal assistance to develop and implement a plan to achieve this goal.
Furthermore, we recognize that even if every town and city in Massachusetts, the U.S., and globally did their part in reducing their emissions in a way commensurate with a below 2 degree Celsius warming goal, the impacts of a changed climate will still affect us. So, in addition to reducing emissions, the Town of Hadley future climate action plan must also include adaptation and resilience planning and preparing for intensifying local climate impacts, such as preparing the levees for intense rainfall and flood. 2, continue to protect trees, forests, natural open spaces because of their ability to draw carbon out of the atmosphere and store it. 3, protect our farmland soils. 4, protect the habitat and corridors of wildlife that are vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And 5, ensure that the costs of such mobilization efforts do not unfairly burden those who are economically or socially disadvantaged or vulnerable.
The Hadley Climate Change Committee, in cooperation with town officials, is taking steps which include establishing a baseline of municipal buildings, greenhouse gas emissions, and with the help of Eversource and MassSave, upgrading municipal buildings to reduce emissions where needed. For Hadley to qualify for state grant programs such as the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources Green Community Designation Grant Program and the Municipal Vulnerabilities Preparedness Grant Program. Once the town qualifies for these programs, we will be eligible for technical and financial assistance for assessing Hadley's specific vulnerabilities and developing a climate action plan to reduce those vulnerabilities through adaptation and resilience. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions, comments? Sir?
So will this declaration be putting any steps in the future of banning fossil fuels for heating and cooling and cooking? Or is this just like, what's your main goal?
This is saying that we need to speak up and we need to act, that it's time now to put our town's name on the list of other towns that are saying, let's get to this.
So,
but we're not going in front of the state house and the legislature and putting forth a bill.
so this is not a first step for further green emissions regulations on the people of the town.
Don't know if we have that power. We can't.
I'm just making sure.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Daniel?
Did you perhaps get together with our state legislatures to create this document? Let's say Commonwealth or anybody like that. This is all done by you people.
Well, we looked also at what other towns
But my question was specific, if you had contacted, or if they had contacted you and had input into this.
Joe Comfort was invited to our April Climate Day. She couldn't make it. She sent in a video.
Oh, yeah. But what I was asking if they had.
Tom Field, you want to say something?
Yes, technically, what's the definition of fossil fuel? What's the definition of fossil fuels? We've referred to it numerous times.
Oil, gas, methane, natural gas, coal.
How about wood? Wood is included as a fossil fuel.
It's not, wood is not fossil. So, you know, if it was, I mean, you're talking about biomass, probably.
No, I'm asking
But fossil fuel is an ancient fuel that emits CO2 when burned, or CH.
It's not wood.
It's not wood.
Peter?
So you're saying by 2035, having a zero carbon, is that what you're talking about? So you want everything being, what are you proposing for the town? Are you talking about having 2050, having battery-operated trucks? Are you talking about imposing battery-operated tractors for the locals in town?
We're not talking about imposing.
Well, what do you, I mean, this is stuff that you're wanting, you're not gonna be mandating, but how are you planning on doing this? Do you planning on having people that have their fossil fuels and then having a heat pump or a ground to water source heat pump that costs money for the electric company, which our electric bills, which everybody's seen, is going up and up and up. So you want to push the batteries and you want to push the electric, but the prices of the electric are going up. You're talking about saving the land in the forest, but has anybody seen what it takes to build a cobalt mine and the area that they're wrecking for the land and the water and the animals? They're not talking about that. So are you gonna be having something saying, oh yeah, by 2050, zero carbon? Are you gonna be opposing saying, okay, if you have a house brand new built in Hadley, it has to be all electric with no fossil fuels? I mean, so you're mentioning this, but you're something that you want, but you're not really telling us how do you plan on doing this and enforcing this. This is something that you want, but is it gonna be, oh, we're gonna cut it dry, we're gonna cut off your fossil fuels and make everything electric?
So that's just a great question. I guess the answer I would give is after the comments that we heard in the summer, we realized we haven't done the study of how to get there. And so we took out every single policy recommendation that we had in the draft in response to those comments. And then we think it's just as important as Josh was describing earlier about what are we going to do in adapting to the growing risk. We need a similar study to figure out how do we get there policy-wise. And that study hasn't been done, so we're not proposing here's exactly how we do it. So this declaration is, we think of it as a mandate to the town to get moving on that in alignment with the policy goals that the state set. Without.
So you're creating something like this, but you haven't even thought of what we could do till 2050? Like, you're talking about the dike of, oh, it's been doing this for 20 years. Let's think about doing something, not get the Army Corps of Engineers, but this is something that we should do. We've known it's been a problem. Let's make a decision and do it. Get some engineers and do it. It's like, let's roll the ball more down the stream until something gets done. Like the dike. Make a decision. If there's a problem, let's address it. If there's a problem with Aquavita, let's address it. You know, let's keep on pushing that ball down the road until something bad happens. So are you going to be saying, well, we're just throwing out ideas what we want to do, but are you going to, like I said, push everybody to buying solar, that you got to spend 50 grand to buying solar on your house? Is that what you're planning on doing? And, you know, are you going to be getting so much credits from Mass Save for having a heat pump, but there are certain mandates that say if you have a heat pump, you have to shut off all of your fossil fuels. But the prices of electric are going up. The cost of
No, we don't say that in this.
But that's the thing, you're not saying anything at all.
You're not saying it was down the road.
Yeah, you're not saying that, but you're trying to, you know, all these things of
If I may just say one thing, so we're a volunteer board
Right.
of the climate committee, right? And so when we come to you, we're actually talking on behalf of the town. So it's not like when you say we, it isn't us. Yes, we are here and we're talking about this, we're just bringing it up as a town. I agree with you. I agree with what you're saying, that we should get together and we should talk about these issues. That's kind of what we're doing here. So as the town, I think we should, you know, think about moving forward, which is why we invite you all.
But you want something to happen by 2050 being zero. Right, that's zero. Well, somebody does, so wherever it is, it's to, okay, it's just not up in the air, we're gonna be, was it Baker said by 2050 being zero? Okay, so you're saying, okay, the town's gotta do this. Is Northampton doing this? Is Fall River doing this? Are all these people doing this?
A lot of that depends on the grid being modernized and the grid becoming electrified, which isn't us just asking.
No, you're right, it's not, but, you know, there needs to be a question on the infrastructure if they're doing all these changes as to, you know.
So Peter, just one thing, the whole gist of this declaration, as I understand it, is a starting point. They're throwing stuff out there that the state's throwing, you know, they're putting that out there. Is it possible for it to happen? We don't know. I've looked at this stuff for months in preparation for this, and I've talked to people, and basically, I look at it as tonight is opening people's eyes as to what's going on. I'm sure we know most of what's going on in the world. But what can we do to make a difference? And do we all have to do it? Do we all have to feel the same way that these people do? No. And if you don't want to have solar panels on your roof, that's your choice. I don't think they're saying anything about mandating anything. So, again, it's just something to think about, conversation. They're looking for suggestions from this audience to help this move forward, some of these ideas to make them happen if they can, but they're not suggesting that tomorrow there's going to be a sign on your door that says your truck goes in the trash and you get an electric one. Hang on, I got a lot of people that want to talk, so yes.
Could someone on the committee explain what being a green community designated town means for the town?
Yeah, over the last couple of years, we've been working hard. There's 5 criteria that the state has in place. So far, we've met 4 of the 5. We're working our way on the last one as well. Once we do that, we will get a grant of $130,000 from the state that the town can use toward reducing the energy costs of our buildings. We're having people come in and look at the energy costs of all the municipal buildings and to try to reduce that, to make things a little bit better.
What are those 4 things that have already passed?
So it is the new stretch code that passed a couple of years ago with town meeting, the fuel efficient vehicle code, and then there's 2 zoning codes. The one last thing that we're working on is analyzing all the different town buildings to make sure they're efficient as they can be. And once this passes, we can use that $130,000 to make it even better.
Daniel.
I've got 2 questions. One is for you, Andy.
Yes, sir.
Who's going to decide about this? Is it going to be the select board or the town meeting?
Town meeting.
My second question is, I've been around the block once or twice, and I've seen in the paper that we're following the lead of California, which scares the living baloney out of me. But I guess we're not going to be allowed to buy gas-powered vehicles by the year, I can't remember, 235 or something?
35.
Nobody asked me about that. No, really, it wasn't a referendum with the town or from the state, do you think this is a good idea? No. They said, oh, we're going to implement this as California's doing it, and 17 other states did that. That's what's guaranteed, that I don't have the same age. You know, it's somebody else who I don't know decides this. And who's reaching their pockets? I don't know, but you know, the new technology, the tax, they give money to politicians, and all of a sudden that's the next biggest idea. So that's something that scares the heck out of me. I know you're trying to do something good, but it's going to go a lot farther than you, and they're going to, you know, we're not going to have anything to say. And that's what scares me.
May I just address this comment? Daniel, Josh, I think we have probably a lot more in common than we have to differ. But to all your points here, I don't think by 2015 anyone's going to be able to buy a diesel John. Yeah, it's just business. Progress is moving forward. It's not even going to be a Hadley issue. You're not. John Deere Green is going to mean something else altogether. It's going to be a big solar panel on the back of that tractor. And that's just the way it's real big. Well, anyway, no. My point is that things are moving ahead, and this is just part of what's going on. We're not following California. This is just the way things are going. This is business.
Yes, sir.
Has a town lawyer looked at the implications of making this declaration?
Yes. And it is, what was the word, Molly? It's non-binding.
It's non-binding.
Yeah, it's non-binding.
Aspirational goal.
So it's not going to, again, it's not going to mandate that anybody has to do anything.
So virtues.
What'd you say?
Listen, supporting this thing is the right thing to do, all right? It's the vulnerable population, the environmental justice, all that language, those are the people who can't get out of Dodge when this thing goes sideways. And they also are supporting the people who are born and raised here and are staying here after this event happens. This is dealing with heat emergencies, flooding, all sorts of all hazards, disasters. All right, so it's progressive. I'm not going to put a bow on it and tell you it's not progressive, right? but it's the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. And as far as I can tell, and I might be wrong, it doesn't cost you anything either. It doesn't, I haven't seen the downside. And I'm looking for it, frankly. I'm looking. Huh? I didn't hear you.
Okay. Molly?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something, maybe clarify, because I know Harry asked a question a little bit earlier. And I know I was off the board for a couple of years, but after we had that initial right failure, I know for those of you who go to town meeting, you may recall that we did actually approve some consulting engineering work. So there was a phase 1, 2, and 3. I know phase 1 of that work was completed, which was an initial assessment. It's probably dated at this point because it's been at least a decade. And then there was another phase 2, which did offer some design ideas about how to deal with the levee system. And that it did indeed, one of the options was to continue a dike infrastructure all the way down the Bay Run side. I'm not aware of the fact that we've gotten any farther than that at this point, which kind of brings us to a lot of the comments tonight about money. Like, where's the funding going to come from? And as Dan said, we hit a brick wall with FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, all of that. What I can tell you is what we know is that Hadley on paper is a relatively wealthy community. So when you look at income, you look at property values. When we're applying for grant money, the problem we have is that, there's just a game of numbers in Boston. It is Boston. They're looking at our financials. They see that we seem to have some relative degree of wealth. We have one of the lowest tax rates in the state. And so when we're applying for grant money, we're not at the top of the list. So in my opinion, anything that we can do to show that the town as a whole is really behind some of these initiatives, it will put us in a slightly, I'm not going to exaggerate, but it will put us in a slightly better position to get the grant money, because the town's going on record saying this is something that's important to us and we really want it. So I know there are a lot of people in the room that are very concerned about the town finances, but this is a kind of, you can't have your cake and eat it too situation. So anything we can do like this that can help put us in better stead to get outside money in, I'm all for it.
Anybody else have anything? Andy?
Yeah, I want to thank the committee for their work on this issue. I really like the declaration, and I think that it's a good first non-binding step to sort of pick a direction of where we want to take our town in the future. My question is, after we pass this, what's the next step? Where does the committee suggest that we go to address the climate crisis? And then, before you answer, I just want to say that you might not be able to buy a gasoline or diesel car or tractor after the specific date, but they're not coming to take your cars away. You'll be able to use what you already have. And I know my neighbors, they're using tractors for the 30s and 40s. So you'll be able to use your diesel tractor for as long as you want.
Okay.
So after we pass this resolution, what's the next step?
Working on a climate action plan for the town. Following up on any grants, we are 20 years behind on getting the green energy grants. We are, besides South Hadley, we are the only town in Hampshire County that hasn't put in for a green communities grant because it never happened. In the meantime, all of our neighbors all around are applying every year for the grant monies that exist. Hadley's missed out on those opportunities. We can keep waiting and lose out on these opportunities, or we can move forward and try to get some of these opportunities.
But making this declaration has nothing to do with asking for those grants. It's just putting it correct.
Two separate things.
They are separate, and I would say, as Molly was just saying, it puts us on the map as, this is something we want to prioritize in this town. And I think it's simply a mandate to the select board and to the town government
I don't know.
So it is a political statement in that regard.
So it's basically strictly a political statement. I mean,
Like so many other things, it is strictly a political statement.
So going back to your point, you
Hang on, wait,
virtue signaling. Sure. Okay. Right?
Wait.
Yeah, so in paragraph 7, point number 5, it says, ensure that the costs of such mobilization efforts do not materially burden those who are economically or socially disadvantaged or vulnerable. What exactly does that mean, and specifically, what is a social disadvantage?
It goes back to what we just talked about earlier in the conversation of what is environmental justice versus social vulnerability. So looking at all the different factors, people have different disadvantages when it comes to, taking care of business, adjusting their livelihoods, adjusting how you do farming practices, adjusting how you do your business. So that needs to be, goes also to Andy, what you asked about, what is the next step. We have this report that is basically a statement of a whole bunch of problems that people are concerned about without a concrete action step. So a more detailed analysis of who is vulnerable, in what way, where are the constraints, what barriers do people face, and how do they need to be supported. We haven't determined that. No one has done that analysis. So to me, that is a really important step in moving adaptation forward and figuring out also on the mitigation side, how do we reduce our emissions. So, again, it doesn't have an answer yet because we haven't studied it. So we're not pushing for a solution before we have moved to detailed innovation.
I have a question or comment. What's UMass going to do about this? UMass is basically a small city that is completely heated with fossil fuels.
They have a very detailed plan, yeah.
So the chancellor is committed with a large organization, thank you, to have the campus be net zero by 2032. And a large part of the heating of the campus currently comes from solar. And there's a big program that was discussed in April about geothermal. So that they're down in the ground, heating water in the ground, bringing that up. So there's at least 7 or 8 geothermal wells that are being drilled right now around campus to provide heat from the ground. So that by 2032, very ambitious goal, maybe it won't happen by 2032.
I live right next to the campus, and in the middle of winter, it's a beautiful sight when the sun comes up from the east, and it's almost like a mushroom cloud coming up from the central heating unit that's right behind us.
So what they do is they supplement right now the solar that is implemented, which is growing, with natural gas. And they do not have, it's natural gas, they don't use coal anymore.
I know, but natural gas is a fossil fuel.
Yes, but the idea is to decrease that over time and increase the other the geothermal and the solar. So if you get 10
Now, how far deep does that geothermal go?
they're going down hundreds of feet. It's actually amazing how much.
With what? Is this something that could potentially contaminate an aquifer?
No,
No,
it's pumping just plain water down in the ground, and when you go down in the ground, it's warmer. So you're pumping water, just plain water, into the ground in pipes. The geothermal heat warms the pipes and brings that heat back to the surface. The house across the street from me in Amherst has that. They have, and they're not hundreds of feet either. But if you're down there, not too far, it's 50 degrees year round. And so in the summer, you can use that water to cool your house, and in the winter, you only have to raise it 20 degrees to get it up. So it's very, very effective. So UMass is on track to try to do that, and I really would. You should have somebody from campus like Ted Mendoza, who was here in April, give a presentation on that. The campus has, by shifting to the new power plant system with the solar, they've decreased their water use by 40%. It's quite amazing. Just because they switched off of coal onto natural gas and solar.
So they're really making a good effort. Believe me, my building, if you came to see my office, is really old. I have single pane glass from the 50s. It's not very energy efficient, but they're going to make a stack. So it's actually a very good thing for the valley.
Tom?
I've got a question. Is electricity generated by fossil fuels, is electricity then considered to be a fossil fuel, or is it all of a sudden became it became green?
So I can address that a little bit further. So basically within the energy mix, it's a very regulated system here in the Commonwealth. There's also energy deregulation. What we're doing is right now is we're increasing the amount of renewable powers that are going into our grid. So say, for example, up until 2014, the solar, the wind industry wasn't really in existence in the Commonwealth. There was a large change in policy that happened with Governor Baker, which basically implemented this entire sort of rush of innovation to bring people to the Cape Wind area in order to be the first ones to kind of get their stake in the ground to begin the process of building wind turbines. So what has happened, and I want to get a little bit further to this question of, so you have more renewable energy going into the grid, which is resulting in every single year we're going greener and greener and greener. I think so. Some of this stuff, when it comes to the greenhouse gas reductions, that is accomplished through regulation of the investor-owned utilities. So I believe it's 2% a year that they're trying to hit as their benchmarks. So in their end, they're investing in solar, they're investing in wind, and they're buying different contracts on the market in order to be able to sell power to our regulated grid, right? So that is how you get more green power into your electrical grid. Now, granted, the grid needs to be upscaled. We need to have major investments in this ancient system, well, not ancient, it's old, that need to be upgraded. We need more three-phase power. And so this is where you get to the point where you have people who are going to have a job, who are going to specialize in completely retrofitting our existing grid to accommodate more renewable power coming from solar, coming from wind. And so yeah, the answer to your question is right now, some of it's green, some of it isn't, but the regulations that are in place are increasing the amount of green power that's going to be delivered to the industry.
Yes, but isn't the solar, I don't know, maybe I'm stupid, but aren't the solar panels just about exclusively made in China?
No, yeah, that's
and aren't they very hard to recycle, or they are unable to recycle?
Yeah, there's a lot going, I'm not an expert in this, but there's a whole group of people looking at how do you recycle the wind turbines investment. And so you're spot on, it's a concern, and there are people working on it, and boy, I trust that they're going to figure something out. It's going to take a while, but it is, these turbines might last 20, 30 years, they're going to be replaced, so then how are we going to recycle? So people are thinking about that. It's not to say, well, then let's not do it. I think we need to look at a lot of recycling, streamlining, circular economies that are really going to help out. So you're right on. It is a problem, but I think there are people working on it.
So an example of that, local homegrown businesses, there's a really amazing startup in Devon's where what they're doing is they're recycling EV batteries. And what they've done, and they had a really interesting article that made it like national press, right? They found that they can take the old battery, they can go take it apart, reassemble it, and upcycle it, so it actually is more efficient, right? So these are the things where I understand there's a lot of like discussions around you're going to tell me that you're going to have to ban this certain thing, and for a really long time there's a lot of misplaced policy recommendations around carbon pricing. And boy, geez, I wish we could have those 20 years back of people saying, for the price of carbon, you're going to have to pay more for it. Because what we're finding right now is that innovation that's taking place is actually making it cheaper. So we're not living in a world where we're going to tell you have to buy something that's more expensive. Where you're entering a world where you can just get something that's better, that provides electrons to whatever you're using, and is cheaper. And I think that's like the innovation where it's really exciting, where it's like there's this great new way of doing things better, faster, and cheaper, and that's like what America's all about. So I think that's what we're trying to collectively as an industry
move people more towards accepting is like, yeah, people spend a long time in these like carbon pricing schemes, and geez, what a waste of time. So now it's all about innovation, and that's really where the market's going. So that's my spiel.
Dan?
I read it somewhere where there was some kind of concern over certain parts of agriculture, I'm going to say dairy, in regards to that. Oh, yeah. Cows. I don't for a minute believe any. But I was just wondering, is this down the road going to look to address some kind of concern like that?
You mean get rid of the cows and cattle?
Well, no, they're saying that there's environmentalists have concerns over dairy cows. And I was just wondering.
I wish we had the farmers here in April, because there are some really great examples of methane digesters already being in use.
Yeah, but
So, you know, I mean, just simply to reduce the problem, that they're still having their cows, so nobody's taking away anybody's cows.
Denise Barstow was one of our guests in April, and she shared about that.
I know all about that, but I'm just telling you what I read.
We're not going to ban dairy farming.
Nobody loves dairy farming.
They don't have the power to ban anything. Town meeting is in charge of all of this stuff. So anybody else have any questions, comments? Seeing none. Okay, before we go, I would like to thank the Climate Change Committee for putting this together. I learned quite a bit tonight. I would like to thank the speakers for coming. All well done. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you all on behalf of the Climate Change Committee for coming out this evening and listening to this and providing what input you provided. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.